Koto, welcome to Shared Lunch. I'm Garth Bray. Mercury Energy is one of our largest electricity generators, just over $9.1 billion by market cap. A year ago, Mercury's board put Stewart Hamilton in the top job, just as dwindling gas supplies and lower rainfall hit generation and retail margins pretty hard. But it's not just how you take the hit, it's how you rise again. So how will Mercury rise? And what will the second year look like for the new CEO? Before we head inside to find out, here's some important information you should always consider when investing.
Investing involves risk. You might lose the money you start with. We recommend talking to a licensed financial advisor. We also recommend reading product disclosure documents before deciding to invest. Everything you're about to see and hear is current at the time of recording.
Stu Hamilton, thank you so much for making time for us.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
Happy anniversary, I understand. It must be we're a few days away from your first year
That's
as CEO.
exactly right, actually, yeah.
So you got your first result that you've put out there, first full year result, just the other day. Do you mind sort of running us through the numbers a little bit, giving us the highlights?
Yeah, absolutely. So first full year result for myself. Obviously, it's been a really challenging 12 months for the sector and actually New Zealand in general. And if you look at the result, we had an EBITDAF of 786 million. It's a good number considering the year that we had. And the reason why we had a challenging year, one was because it was very, very dry, one of the driest on record. And that represents itself in the result, but equally quite a good result in that we actually had a very resilient set of assets and a team which able to perform very well during those tough conditions. The really big thing, and the thing that a lot of our analysts and our owners were very excited about, is what we project for the next year and beyond. And so for next year, we're guiding to $1 billion, which is a great number for us to be looking at, on the way to a 1.1 to 1.2 by 2030, and that's exciting. And underneath that, even further, is excitement around what we're building. And so over half of the money we're making is going straight back into new projects or to maintain our current projects. And that's exciting because we've got a really good balance sheet, puts us in a great position to really leverage this electrification sort of movement ahead of us.
Maintenance. Who spends money on maintenance in New Zealand? This is just wait till it breaks and then fix it kind of thing.
Correct. And that's a really good thing from our industry, actually. You look at, we've got a lot of really amazing assets that are up to 100 years old. New Zealand, we're very fortunate that over the last 100 years we've had these amazing hydro assets that have been built. Now's our time to actually reinvest into them so they've got another 100 years to go and more.
Right. Can you give me a sense of how you can be so confident in a business where basically if it rains you make money? How can you be so confident with that forward guidance that people seem to have?
Definitely we're in a business where we make money when there is fuel, whether that's water or wind or sun. They're our renewable fuels. Produce electricity. One of the things we have that's very useful and unique to Mercury is the diversity of our assets or our power stations. Diversity in terms of the types of renewable fuels they use, and also diverse in terms of the geographic location. And so we have hydro, which is water, we have wind, and we have geothermal. The great thing about geothermal is that whether it's blowing or raining or shining, it keeps producing energy. We draw this hot liquid out of the ground, extract electricity, and then we re-inject that liquid back into the ground. So base load, really, really nice. Then with wind, we actually spread it around the country. So from the far north, which we're building a wind farm at the moment near Dargaville called Kawakawe, to the deep south, another project of ours called Korea Downs 2. And you tend to find in New Zealand that when the wind's not blowing in the north, it's actually in the south and vice versa. So having that diversity of location is really good. Diversity of fuel is really good. So if we do have a drier year, we're better able to manage that risk. Now it does have an impact, but we pride ourselves in being able to limit that impact as much as we can.
The geothermal stuff, and I know you're an engineer by training, so you'll probably be happy to nerd out on these things for a bit, but it's not a completely carbon neutral process, isn't it? You do get a little bit of CO2 and other gases coming out, so it's not a completely net zero. Is there any technology that you guys are working on or working with others to turn that around or to capture more out of that energy stream?
Yeah, absolutely right. So definitely from a geothermal perspective, firstly, awesome power source, nice base load that operates. When you do extract the hot brine out of the ground, it does have some dissolved carbon dioxide in it, and that gets released to the atmosphere. We have, both ourselves and others in the industry are looking at how we can capture that CO2 and then re-inject it back into the ground, so it basically becomes a closed loop. And we've been pretty successful at one of our sites that we've been trialling at the moment, capturing over 50% of the CO2 and re-injecting it into the ground, and really looking at rolling that out to other sites. It's a little bit like the old soda stream. You know, soda stream bottles, when you kind of press the button and inject the CO2 into your soda stream bottle? It's the same thing. We're kind of injecting that CO2 back into the liquid stream so it's captured and sequestered underground.
Great. And is it Mokai and Tamariki or one of those?
So Tamariki is the main site we're doing at the moment, and certainly that's sort of it's close to Taupo, and then looking at doing a similar thing for our sites from Mokai to Kawerau and Ngā Aotearoa.
A lot of those fields, if I understand, they were drilled and tested and explored like in the 80s.
Yeah.
But it's only in the last 10, maybe 20 years that there's been construction there to actually capture. Have we left it a little bit late? Should we have been doing much sooner with geothermal, and why not?
Yeah, you're right. Really, New Zealand is actually world leading in geothermal, and New Zealand's electricity grid is 20%, close to 20% geothermal. That's on a global scale pretty amazing. It is off the back of work that was done through the 1960s, 70s, 80s to drill to find not only the hot zones, but the hot zones that have the water that you can actually extract and then re-inject back in. So we're really, New Zealand built its geothermal fleet through largely the 1990s to the 2000s on the basis of all that drilling. Now then what happened in New Zealand was that demand for electricity was very, very flat for the sort of 20-year period. So without that demand, we largely sort of said, well, there's nothing to keep building into. We'll keep operating those power stations very well. What that means now that we can see the demand going off, we're kind of just getting match fit, teaching ourselves what does it mean to develop geothermal. And that's one of the really exciting things out of our Ngā Tamariki OEC5 unit that we're just expanding at the moment, is that we've built this muscle again, we've learned how to develop power stations, and it's almost like a renaissance period of geothermal for us in the industry, because I think it's got a massive role to play in the future of New Zealand's electrification journey.
If you think about that period where there wasn't that much demand, you say, and therefore there wasn't much incentive to try and build more, what was behind that, do you think? I mean, some people would say we just got more efficient, so we didn't need as much to do more. Other people might say we were actually losing, we were deindustrialising, we were losing businesses at quite a high scale that nobody really kind of picked up on.
Yeah, I'd say the first point is absolutely right. What's tended to happen is people are using more appliances electrically, but they're more efficient. So definitely see that the consumption of electricity has stayed about flat from a household perspective. From an industrial perspective, New Zealand's last 100 years has been off the back of our great resources and energy, and that has been led to some pretty significant global companies coming to New Zealand, one of which I used to work at, the Te Point aluminium smelter, New Zealand Steel. Some of those big companies are still doing very strong in New Zealand. Sort of over the last 20 years, there has been that not much growth, but the other thing that's been sort of sitting there has been the risk of some companies leaving, like Te Point. And if Te Point was to leave, that's 15% of New Zealand's power. So when you have that risk there's a risk that 15% is going to drop out. You can understand why it might be you're a little bit cautious about what you build, because you could build and then that load drops, price crashes, and you're left not being able to recover your return on those assets. So that's been a big part of it. Then the other really interesting thing over the last couple of years has been the sudden drop off in gas. And that has been really challenging, because typically we've relied on gas to support us during the dry years, because we are dominated by hydro in New Zealand. Now, without those couple of things there, it's meant that we've almost have been a little bit late to actually picking up the rate that we build, and now we are.
A lot of people would say the gas thing, though, was a little bit foreseeable because we know from overseas that a lot of gas fields, they get old, they stop producing. There's only so much you can do. I think in the North Sea, there's some talk that they were able to find technologies to wring a little bit more out of there. We're not probably seeing that happening at this stage, are we?
No, I think you could foresee that it was going to drop off, but just not at the rate that it's happened, because the gas industry has continued to keep drilling on the current fields. It just hasn't been able to find or increase the production from those fields at what was expected to happen. So it has caught us a little bit by surprise, just the rate and the quantity that it's dropped off at.
Sure. How did that specifically affect Mercury then? Because you're, as you say, you're mostly in those renewables.
Yeah.
How much of that is contracted from fields? You're not an owner of any of those.
No, that's right. Yeah, we all of our electricity comes from renewable sources and renewable electricity assets. We do, for our household customers who provide electricity from us, we do provide gas for them as well. So we do have to go and buy that gas from someone to provide it. So that's an impact on us. The other thing though is gas is important from the whole of the electricity sector. So while we're producing electricity from hydro and from wind and from geothermal, at various times it's very useful for the whole of the grid to have a little bit of gas there. So when there's a little less rain, it can actually come into the electricity grid and keep the stability there, so that ultimately New Zealand can keep turning the lights on and have power flowing through to our businesses.
Just catching back on that idea about the pipeline for new generation and so on, and how we're now catching up. I mean, I get the risk part, but some people would also say there was a sort of an incentive in there not to overbuild, not to take the risk, because you're trying to make a return for shareholders and so on. But has that put us in a worse position now?
I'd say there are incentives. There have been incentives to build. It's just making sure that you are building the right type of assets in the right place at the right time. And so if you look at the last year when we didn't have the rain that was there, prices went up, and that has a massive impact on particularly those businesses that don't have long-term hedges in place. Ultimately, it does flow through to household prices, but it's pretty slow. But the big issue with not having that energy there is that ultimately we are having to ourselves purchase power from somewhere else to provide to our customers. So last year when we didn't have so much water in our lakes, we had to go and purchase that power from others, and the price was quite high, and that's the main reason why our EBITDA performance, the amount of money we earned last year, was down by about $90 million.
And you've now baked that in along with the other sort of two of your major competitors by sort of buying some firming capacity from Huntly, from Genesis, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's a big part of the risk mitigation or process we have in place now, and it's really, really important, because the other thing it does is it gives us the confidence to keep building intermittent renewables.
Do you think you are completely relaxed that, say, the Commerce Commission, when they take a look at that, aren't going to say, "Oh, crikey, this is just four big players getting together and funding an asset and not necessarily involving others"? What gives you confidence that that's not going to be the case?
You're absolutely right. Commerce Commission still have to sign off on this deal between four competitors, and there's been two key things that have happened on the way. Firstly, we've had an independent company look across it to make sure that it's fair and reasonable. Second thing is that it's actually a product that it's now available to others as well. So it's not exclusive. It's been negotiated between the four big gentailers, and yet it's also there and available for anybody else at very similar terms and conditions.
Very similar.
Well, it'll be slightly different depending on, like if we want 50 megawatts, you might be slightly smaller, you might only want 1 or 2 megawatts. So it'll be different in terms of what you require, but the terms and conditions in terms of price are very, very similar. Because
there's that word cartel, which is, it's very easy to prove a cartel, isn't it? A lot easier than it is to prove that there's a monopoly going on.
Yeah, and it's tough, right? Because New Zealand does have some great gentailers, and I can absolutely understand what the Comcom, the Commerce Commission are doing, Electricity Authority. They're trying to make sure that there's competition in the market, primarily because they want affordable electricity prices for New Zealand. Perfect, absolutely the right thing to be doing. Now we think that the market is really strong. There are a lot of retailers out there, and there's 20% churn happening each year. So that shows that 20% of customers move every year. That's a pretty healthy measure of competition going on.
But they're mostly moving between the majors, right? And you are seeing consolidation and so on. I think Trustpower might have come on board, and what tends to happen is a smaller retailer winds up being bought out by a bigger one. Yeah.
It can happen, yeah, right. There's actually about roughly 50 independent retailers in New Zealand, compared to a place like the UK where there's about 20. So there's a lot of independence in New Zealand. It's how do we help transparency of prices so that people can be confident that the prices are competitive and affordable.
So I think the Electricity Authority was talking about making some part of that market kind of compulsory for you and your three major competitors to kind of contribute to. Are you already playing in that? This is the shaped hedges, which has got nothing to do with topiary or mazes or whatever. It's got to do with creating a product that's
through the day. From a global perspective, we rank in the top 10 best markets globally from an electricity perspective, whether that's affordability, sustainability, or security. So we do have a market that's very good, but can it be better? Absolutely it can be. And what the ComCom and the EA are trying to do is create transparency. That's part of that is shaped hedges, so that everybody, whether you're an independent retailer or someone who's actually looking at bringing on a new project, you can see what a megawatt or a kilowatt is worth, and that gives you the confidence to be able to buy or to sell the electricity. Very supportive of that. One of the things we've been looking at is something called the level playing field provision. Now, it's early and it's not a lot of detail associated with that yet, so we're a little bit cautious to see what comes out of it. Again, understand that it's trying to create better transparency and ultimately make sure we have affordable prices. Just not entirely sure that this is the right way to do it, because if you look at a household bill that you and I get at our houses, only about 10 or 11% of that is from retail costs. So we can do some work to make sure that retail is competitive, but it's only 11% of the bill. We believe that actually the bigger parts of the bill, which is about 40% associated with generation and about maybe 30% associated with the lines and transmission, they are things that actually we could do a lot more on. And the things that Mercury can control is around generation, and the best thing we can do in that space is to build more projects.
And that would be your preferred solution than regulating the market or creating a split or anything like that. Have you modelled that? Have you looked at what sort of impact breaking the business up might have?
Yeah, so you talked about basically in New Zealand where we have the generators and the retailers connected together, so gentailers, and they're called vertically integrated. We believe that they're not just in New Zealand, we've had a lot of look at this across the world. It's actually a lot of benefit in doing that, a lot of synergies that ultimately some of the studies show do get passed on to customers in terms of what that connection creates.
So by the same token, unwinding those synergies, what have you looked at what that could do for the business?
It does create things that lead to inefficiencies in the way that the companies work. If they were separated, creates risk that wouldn't have been there previously. So our belief is that the split will not add additional value either to customers, to New Zealanders, or to the owners of those companies.
People said the same thing about telecom. When they broke it off and said, hey, here's Chorus and here's Telecom over here, we'll make it Spark. And then, whatever it is, 15, 20 years later, we've got two, one pretty successful company and another one that's, had some rough times but come along and certainly, had an interesting journey if you're talking about Spark. So, I mean, it's not like a fait accompli that cutting something in half.
No, and even in the electricity industry, the same thing.
From an investment point of view, I suppose, or for an investor's point of view.
Correct, and even in the electricity sector, we do have the split there already. So yes, Spark and Chorus is split. You look at the electricity industry, Transpower, which looks after the transmission lines, that is separate from the gentailers, that is separate from the distribution companies as well, the EDB. So there is actually an element of disaggregation that occurs already, which is trying to separate some of the more infrastructure nature to some of the more development and retail side of the businesses. So that split is there and has been useful. It's just trying to find the right synergies and model that actually ultimately results in lowest cost to customers and ultimately good value for its owners.
We're a year out, more or less, maybe 14 months from an election. Are you worried at all that the politicians are just maybe going, that's fine, but we need some wins, and this is an easy one potentially?
The reason why I'm worried is because New Zealand is facing a cost of living crisis still, right? And it has been going on for a while, and I think will continue for a while. And that doesn't just apply to energy, it applies to food, it applies to access to money through banks, and so it's part of a broader concern that exists for New Zealanders. And energy has a big part to play in that. So yes, it definitely has an impact, and so we are working as well as we can to try and address the problem of getting affordable energy as well as we can and make sure it's sustainable. That's a really complicated problem to solve in a small period of time. And it's whether or not we actually have the time to do that and demonstrate that we're on the right path before someone says, you're not going fast enough, we'll do something different. So like a lot of people say, the government owns you, there must be
Well, there's an incentive there, or certainly there's a mixed mixed incentive, right? There's a shareholding minister on one hand is saying, hey, we need to pay for hospitals, schools, everything else, and this is part of how we do that in this country without taxing people, versus we want to try and deliver energy at lowest possible cost.
Correct, there is, and so that there's regulating and a concern for New Zealanders from a customer perspective, and at the same time, government receives dividends from us and taxes from us. So if you look at the money which we made in the last year, about a third of that goes to the government in some way, whether it's through dividends because they're our owner, or through taxes. And so that's a great revenue stream that the government can use for hospitals and schools and roads. Equally, want to make sure that we're doing that in a way which is globally competitive and affordable. And that's really the other conversation we have with the government.
How different is it being on the other side of the table from where you were before? Because you ran the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter, basically, right? It was huge, as you said, massive electricity user. Who's got the power there? The person that's like the government-owned company that's selling electricity, or this very large, ultimately multinationally owned company that's saying, hey, we represent thousands of jobs and export earnings for this country?
First, I'd say there's more similarities than differences. Both, if you look at electricity industry, large sort of aluminium industry, both employing lots of people. We believe that electricity and electrification has a huge role to play. A lot of the times people look at what percentage is our electricity grid renewable, and at the moment it's hovering around high 80% to about 90%, and people talk about trying to get to 100%. Our view is it should get to maybe mid-90s, and we'll easily get that. And we've got many projects in train to get there. And then what you do is actually, rather than focusing on the electricity grid, then you turn and focus on the other forms of fossil fuel usage in New Zealand. Cars, transportation is about 20% of New Zealand's carbon footprint. Many industries contribute to carbon as well. So the electrification of those industries away from fossil fuels and vehicles away from fossil fuels, that's got massive potential, and that's a big part of what Mercury is good at, and that's where we can absolutely support. And then the other part of it is actually looking at what New Zealand's economy should look like over the next 10, 20 years. And there's a big part to play in different types of industry. So you'll see the load potentially move away from more heavy industry, and they'll still have the load, but the percentage will grow more towards other things like data centres and other forms of electricity, which actually create enormous potential for us as well.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the day that they build a massive data centre in Kawerau.
Data centres, often people think they should be close to where people are using the data. So build them in the US where there's lots of use for data. And yet there's a big part that New Zealand could play, because data centres that are there for artificial intelligence need to be trained. They need to have kindergartens for artificial intelligence. And so that doesn't actually need to be close to the load. So there's potential for New Zealand to get very good at artificial intelligence kindergarten centres, training centres, and that could be a long way away from the US. So that's where New Zealand can actually be very strong.
Kindergarten for AI. What a great place to raise children and large language models.
Correct. Yes,
fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah.
It seems like a long way from running a gold mine in Tanzania. That's a very, very different. It's an extractive industry in a developing part of the world, and must have brought with it. What on earth took you over there?
Yeah, where did I go there? I spent a career in New Zealand and Australia for 20 years in engineering, and largely in aluminium. And I had this really interesting discussion with my boss's boss, and they said, Stu, you're doing an amazing job, but you've been in New Zealand all your life, you've stuck to the same company, and you've stuck to aluminium. You probably need to get out and learn a bit about the world. So I actually did my MBA, and I met some cool people there. And then through this process, I said, I've been suggested I should do something different. And that person was going to Tanzania. And he said, Stu, come over to work for us. So I went back to my boss's boss and said, thank you very much. I appreciate your support of me in my career, but I'm going gold mining in Tanzania. And so I went over there, was very fortunate to be a general manager of a large gold mining operation with about 1,200 people in the middle of a community in northwest Tanzania. And it was a fantastic experience. Just recognising, again, the big thing I took away from that was the value that an organisation can have on the community and a country. And you just don't want to take that for granted. And part of the situation there that we actually fell into was the company was ultimately held to account by the government because they didn't feel like the company was sharing fairly the value of the gold mine with the country. And that's certainly, I think, something I take on board coming back to New Zealand is how do we make sure that these amazing assets that New Zealand has and that Mercury has are being shared fairly in terms of our owners, in terms of our community, in terms of iwi, and in terms of ultimately customers in New Zealand.
So social license in a phrase.
Spot on. Yeah.
And you think you're handling that pretty well here at Mercury?
I think Mercury does it pretty well. Can it be better? It absolutely can be, but I'm very proud. Well, I think if you look at the kind of the role that Mercury plays across all people, we're very good at supporting customers in hardship. We're very good at supporting customers who like to have a bundled product. Can we do better in terms of some communities? I think we possibly can be. We have some really strong relationships with iwi. Actually, we have some commercial joint ventures with iwi and Ahawhenua Trust, which is fantastic. I still think part of what happened over a few years ago when Trustpower and Mercury merged is we have brought ourselves together to be one company, and yet how we show up in some communities can be a little bit different to other communities, and I'd like to make sure we're a bit more consistent in who Mercury is, and therefore how do we show up in Oamaru versus Tauranga versus Rotorua versus other parts of New Zealand.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's been a busy year then.
It has, but there's a lot to come.
What was the most surprising thing you think that you didn't realise you'd need to do better or didn't realise was so important after that?
Interviews like this.
You're doing fine.
Thanks. No, thing for me, actually, last week was really, really amazing because it was a first chance to really talk with a lot of the analysts and a lot of our investors. And I went into there thinking, this will be tough. And it was challenging at times, and yet it was just really nice to see a really good recognition of the work that we've done over the last year. We've done a lot of work to simplify our strategy, refresh it, so it's really, really clear on how we add value and communicate that to our owners and our analysts. And they really like that. They go, it's really clear, we can see what you're doing as a company, you're focusing on efficiencies in your business, you've got a great pipeline, particularly excited about geothermal, which is awesome. You've got a really strong balance sheet which gives you options to go ahead, and we like what we can see in terms of what you're saying you're going to deliver and then how you're going to, return that value back to our owners. Now we just need to get on and deliver.
Stu, thank you very much for your time, and thank you as well for watching, for listening, wherever you're picking this up, whether it's on iHeart or on Apple Podcasts or straight off the Sharesies app. Let us know what you thought. Let us know what we should be taking a look at, and we'll be back next time. Ko matu, that's us for now.